Greetings, my friends, it's Top Hat here, and arguably, we all live in the same reality. We all stand on the same Earth. We're all acted on by the same laws of physics. When you and I look at the same red or blue object, we're both looking at the same shade of red, blue. So, why is it that you like the color of the blue object more, while I prefer the color of the red object? Preference is obviously the answer, but why? Why do we have differing preferences? We're both looking at the same objects, right? Why should we have different thoughts while seeing the same thing? Why has, over time, human understanding of physics changed, while the actual laws of physics have themselves always remained static? Why would some agree with me that the laws of physics are static, while others might argue that maybe the laws of physics have not remained static, and that's why our understanding of the laws have changed? Why did society used to think the world was flat, while we now largely think the Earth is round? Why are there differing political opinions and worldviews among people? We all live in the same world, so shouldn't we all see the same truth? Well, no. No, we shouldn't. Most people subconsciously seem to think that we should, which is why a lot of people who think anyone who views things differently from them do so simply because they're less intelligent. See the YouTube comments section. This is a viewpoint as common as it is caustic. This way of thinking leads to intellectual stagnation because it overlooks one very critical concept: perception. The next bit of what I say might be obvious to some, but I have to go over it before I talk about what's not so obvious, so bear with me here. Also keep in mind that what I'm about to say is not exactly to be applied to scientific topics, and I'll be applying it to other areas. Anyway, a lot of people seem to think that reality is the only thing that matters. So much so that they don't even consider perception to be of any importance. They seem to believe that people just arbitrarily know what is and isn't reality. What you need to realize, however, is that we have no way of knowing, or just knowing, what is and isn't reality. All we have is perception. Through that perception is how we build our understanding of reality. That's one reason why ideas of things change, even if the things themselves remain static. Arguably, in some cases, perception is actually the only thing that's important, since all we know of reality is built from perception. This might be a bit of a confusing concept to some of you, so I'll clarify. For the sake of simplicity, we'll claim that what is actual reality does not change, though in reality may or may not change. But in some cases, which I'll talk about later, the only reality is the understanding we build through perception. So that begs the question of, in some cases, is there a true reality, and if so, does that reality even matter? If, in these areas, our understanding of reality is all that we know, and it stems from perception, then couldn't one argue that in this instance perception is reality more so than reality is reality, and reality is thereby rendered subjective? This is a reason why people have differing preferences, beliefs, ideas, etc. I don't know if it's the only reason, but I definitely feel that it's at least one of the reasons. This is why we can both look at the same picture and think vastly different things. Throughout our lives, we have different experiences. We build associations for the same stimuli, and thus have a different perception. The most basic example I can think of has to do with how people associate smells with memories. Perhaps a certain smell you associate a fond memory, while with the same smell I associate a painful memory. From the same reality, the smell, we both draw a different perception. Now you're happy, and I'm sad. In this discussion, I mostly want to explore this concept in an area that most people don't even consider perception to be an aspect of, though I often feel like it's the single most important aspect of it. I'd like to talk about perception in the context of communication and social interaction. I'll start out with an example. I have a friend who acts completely self-centered to a rather extreme degree. He'll plead with me for months to get an entire console just to play one game with him, and I did, only for him to stop playing the game with me after like 3 weeks of playing the game maybe twice a week. Prior to that, he pestered me to get a different game, and prior to that he pestered me to play a different free-to-play game, and got upset with me for not playing it even though my computer literally wouldn't run it. But after all the demands for me to get these games and play with him, and me actually playing the games with him, or at least attempting to, he often won't play any games with me, like ever. Even if it's a game he likes playing, if he'd rather do something else, he doesn't care what I want to do. Even if it's a game we both play, if he doesn't feel like playing that particular game and feels like playing something else, well, he's going to play the other thing and, I can join him or not. He never cares to go out of his way to play games or whatever that I want to. But he's quick to ask me to do something for him, or quick to ask me to play a game with him if he wants to play it. But when we do play together, if, say, he wants to play a character I don't like, he won't care at all. He'll exclusively play the character 100% of the time and completely disregard my preference, while being quick to complain heavily if I play a character he doesn't want. He promised he'd get me a shirt if I got the aforementioned console and game, which I did, but he never got me the shirt. He ended up spending far more than the cost of the shirt on sending mystery skins to other people on League of Legends, so it's blatantly disregard for his promise. It's not like he's too poor to spend the money. There's no excuse at this point. Perfectly fine for me to drop money on a console, peripherals, etc. to play one game with him that he doesn't even play with me anymore, but he can't even buy a damn shirt for me. I get him a birthday present. Literally 4 months later, when my birthday comes around, I don't think he even wished me a happy birthday. But either way, he didn't get me a present. And yes, he knew it was my birthday. And you'll understand later why I'm kind of digging into him so much. I know what y'all are probably thinking after hearing this story, right? You're probably thinking the same thing any rational person, and pretty much everyone who I've talked to about the situation who's a friend of myself and the person I'm talking about. This guy clearly hates me, right? What other reason could it be? Everyone also tells me to stop talking to him, and I mostly have. I mean, he doesn't call me or respond to my calls or messages, so whatever. If he does have some sort of problem with me, he's never told me what it is, even though I've asked him, so I assume I haven't done anything. So the interesting part is, after all this, he still swears that he doesn't dislike me, and claims he can't understand why I've been acting so annoyed with him lately. When I ask him why he's acting this way towards me, he responds by saying, "Acting what way?" Assuming he's not just trolling me, which is the most reasonable possibility I can imagine at this point. I mean, it's not like he's never been dishonest with me in the past. Well, let's analyze this from the perspective that he really can't imagine what he's done to bother me. So why is it that he can act in such a self-centered way, completely disregard me in nearly every way, and yet have no clue what he's doing? Normally I'm skeptical of negatively judging people, like how I claim that he's self-centered, but literally everyone else I know who knows him also thinks he's self-centered, so it's not like I'm the only one who thinks this of him. Everyone else I know does too. Everyone else I know knows him. But anyway, how can he be so clueless is really very simple. He just has no regard for perception and social interactions. The only thing he cares about is his reality. No one else's. He has a belief that some objective, true reality that he fabricates without consciously realizing he's doing any of this is the only thing that matters. For example, he believes himself to be a very helpful, compassionate, and compromising person. He genuinely believes that's the reality, and he's so self-assured that it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. He knows he's a good person, and if you think otherwise, that's simply your fault for misunderstanding, and well, there's nothing he can do about it because it's your problem. It couldn't possibly be that he miscommunicated. I mean, he knows everything he's thinking. It's your fault for misunderstanding. He thinks this way because he has no consideration for perception. He demands I spend all this time and money to appease him, but he won't even take 30 minutes to watch Kung Fury with me. And he can't even begin to fathom why I think he's self-centered, because he pays no attention to how he treats others. Why should he? He's such a good person after all, so why should he have to pay attention to how he treats others? Obviously the reality is that he's a good person. Another example, for a different person, I recently had to call him out over a pretty big lie he'd been holding onto for quite some time. I'd known he was lying the whole time. It was pretty darn obvious. I don't think he really even tried to hide it. I played along with it for long enough, but eventually I decided I didn't want him to think any longer that he could trick me so easily. It took a lot to get him to finally admit it. I told him how I really felt and that I honestly didn't care at all about what he did, and I only didn't like being lied to, how I'd known the whole time, all that, and he still denied it. He still tried to keep lying to me. It wasn't until I produced solid, unquestionable evidence that he was lying that he even alluded to the idea that he might have not been 100% truthful. Eventually I got him to admit to it, and so I said I appreciated him for being honest, and that I'd like for him to not lie to me in the future, because I don't appreciate it. Just be real with me. And then get this, he actually has the nerve to say something to the extent of, hey, at least I told you the truth in the end, right? I had to produce photographic evidence that he was lying. Photographic evidence. And then he still denied it a few more times. And after all that, he still makes a comment like I should think him any semblance of an honest person after this experience. He tried to act like I should have come out of that experience thinking better of him. Hell no, I shouldn't. He held on to the truth until the bitter end, and even denied it a few more times when there was not even the slightest shadow of doubt that he was lying. His actions were that of a liar, and I can't imagine how clueless he'd have to have been to think for any amount of time that the experience made him seem like anything less than a dishonest person to me. He walked away perceiving that I'd think better of him since he finally came clean in the end, but I perceived that he's willing to lie until the bitter end, and I can't even count on him to be truthful with me, even if I have solid proof that he's lying to me. So how can I trust him in the future when he's already exhibited to me how bent, how dead set he is on lying if he thinks it's going to benefit him in some way? Do you see why it's so important to consider perception in your social interactions? You need to remember no one knows what goes on in your mind. Say you have a friend who constantly invites you to hang out, go to the mall, go bowling, whatever, but you always have to say you can't for some reason. Maybe you have family visiting, maybe you have work, have to study for a test, so on and so forth. But you really do want to spend time with this person. You hope that someday he'll invite you during a time that you're available. But what you need to realize is that he has no ability to know what's in your mind. He has no way to perceive your thoughts, as no one does. All he knows is what you tell him, and all you tell him is you can't spend time with him. If you don't make it clear to him that you want to hang out with him, but he has bad timing, or more importantly, you don't make some sort of effort on your part to ever spend time with him, he's going to think you just don't want to spend time with him. He'll stop inviting you to hang out, and he's in the right. Any intelligent person in his position would think that, and they should. All he sees is that you don't accept his invites. If you want him to know you want to spend time with him, but he just has bad timing, you have to tell him that. If you want to have healthy relationships, or at least have people understand you the way you want them to, you have to consider perception. It's not optional. It's something you absolutely have to be aware of. If you don't call someone or respond to most of their messages, you should expect them to think that you don't want to talk to them. If you happily accept gifts from someone but you never reciprocate, you shouldn't wonder why they stop sending you gifts. If you promise someone things and never deliver, and you try and lie to them, you should not be surprised when they don't trust you. When you give someone enough information to let them, when you don't give someone enough information to let them know what you're thinking, they're gonna try and guess. They're probably gonna guess the worst, and there's almost no possibility they will correctly guess what you're thinking, and you really can't expect them to. Your ability to tell what others perceive about you can easily be clouded by what you think of yourself. What you think about yourself is completely irrelevant to everyone besides yourself. What you think about yourself is important to your self-perception for things like self-esteem, but I can't think of a reason why it should be relevant to anyone else. Socializing is pretty much completely about what the other person thinks. We as a human race communicate to transfer ideas. In that context, what you think about what you're saying is irrelevant because you don't communicate ideas to tell yourself your own ideas. If the entire point of communication is to get your ideas to someone else, then in conversation truly the only thing that matters is what the other person ends up thinking. That's why it's all about their perception. If you believe you're selfless, but you actually act self-centered, which is it? Are you selfless or self-centered? What defines you as a person? What you think of yourself and what you say, or your actions? If the two conflict, which one's more important? I'm going to go ahead and say your actions define you far more than what you claim. In fact, if your words don't match your actions, then you face serious social implications. If your actions and words conflict, you are a liar. You are not trustworthy. You are dishonest. If you want to be seen as truthful and trustworthy, you need to make damn well sure that your words match your actions. Perception is also why the term love is blind comes into play. For example, your friend might love his girlfriend while you hate her. The reason he doesn't perceive her the same way you do is because you're in different positions. Perhaps you're just upset that he spends more time with her than you. Or perhaps he fell in love with who he perceives instead of seeing who she actually is. Or, a completely different option. The next area I want to apply some concepts of perception to are debates or arguments regarding pretty much anything. There's a reason why some, and by some I mean most, people continue to deny what you say in an argument, even if they can't argue against whatever evidence you show them. These people are so thoroughly convinced that their perception is reality, that if you think differently, then you're just not perceiving the true reality. They believe that, on the subject being discussed, reality is objective and the same for everyone. So, if they know reality, and your view of reality contradicts with theirs, then obviously you're just wrong. For whatever reason they either want to believe their beliefs are true, or they've simply convinced themselves that their beliefs are reality. And, by the way, everything you think is a belief. If you think what you know on any subject, even scientific ones, isn't a belief, and is some sort of fact, then you are, by definition, the exact kind of person I'm talking about here, because you've already convinced yourself that your perception is the objective reality. Do you see why an emphasis on reality over perception is so detrimental for intelligence? If you think you're correct, then you just won't hear what anyone else has to say if it doesn't follow suit with what you want to know, or what you think. Only when you accept the fact that you might be wrong do you critically analyze what you think is true. Otherwise, you just take your opinions as fact and dismiss anything that contradicts with them, and with that attitude, you'll never learn anything. Everything everyone thinks they know is only a belief because of the effects of perception, and the only way to judge the validity of a belief is to see what evidence and reasoning supports it. And just because you can support your belief better than one person in a particular situation, that doesn't necessarily make your belief correct and theirs wrong. Perhaps the other person simply doesn't know as much about their belief as you know about yours. You should always seek additional knowledge from many, many other sources that both agree and disagree with your beliefs. You see, you have to actually want to learn new ideas. You don't just collect intelligence through photosynthesis. You have to try when learning new concepts and refining information you know. And the worst thing about what I've just talked about is that almost everyone does this to some extent, and vast majority of the time people do it, they don't even realize it. I've known this concept for years, and I still catch myself doing it on occasion. It's human nature and stems from the emotion of pride. Pride in being smart, and the false belief pride gives us of thinking that it's a sin to ever be incorrect. Socially speaking, being incorrect or mistaken should almost never be seen as a fault, because not admitting when you're wrong is a far more insidious problem. Not accepting mistakes and failing to fix them is far worse a problem than making the mistake to begin with. I mean, if you're gonna make the mistake anyway. If people weren't belittled for seeming correct in a debate, if it was perfectly fine to be able to admit when you think you're wrong without others taking as an admission that they're an objectively smarter person than you, then people wouldn't hold on to beliefs that they should accept as false. Well, they wouldn't as much anyway. There's still plenty of other reasons to hold on to a belief that's not correct. They would be able to move on and be able to find the beliefs that make the most sense to them. But instead, we as a society force people to continue to lie even when they know they're wrong for fear of the people thinking lesser of them. This renders a lot of discussion useless in many cases because this gives people a stronger motivation to deny new ideas and hold on to their beliefs, and discourages accepting new ideas. You can also apply some ideas to perception when discussing dynamics of debating or arguing with others. For instance, when debating something in front of a group of others, if you dislike the person you're arguing against but want to impress the crowd, that's when you throw out your good comebacks because you care for the perception of the crowd and not the one you're directly talking to. Unless, of course, you're in an intellectual debate. Never mind it. No, people still care about zingers. If you're in a one-on-one debate, like you're discussing something or arguing with a friend and you diss the other person, then the other person is just going to think you're an asshole. And you probably are. Because such remarks really don't serve a purpose in that setting, unless you want that other person to dislike you. It might boost your own ego to come up with a sick burn to shut someone down, but if it's in a one-on-one, when it comes down to it, you have to ask yourself, what do you want to improve? Your perception of yourself or their perception of yourself? You can feel better about yourself while treating others with respect and having positive interactions, but I just want to stress how pointless it is to come up with some snide remark that doesn't further discussion when you're in a private conversation. If you're talking to someone privately about an issue, you should be talking with them to try and resolve the issue, not putting them down and, making them feel bad. It just doesn't accomplish anything except make them like you less. You need to realize that. Another thing I should mention, because it's related to this video's topic, is that when someone is telling you some sort of story about issues they're having, they always make themselves appear better than they are, no matter how honest the person telling the story is. They always suppress some details and emphasize other details to make themselves appear in the right, either in the right completely, or at least to downplay what they did wrong. Whenever you hear someone telling you a story about their troubles with other people, as I've done twice in this video, keep in mind that the storyteller always makes themselves out better than they are. And it's not even intentional most of the time. Doing that doesn't make someone a dishonest person. In fact, it's pretty much impossible not to, unless you deliberately go out of your way to make yourself seem worse than you are. Which I actually did in my examples. I could have made those two seem far worse, and I consciously omitted a few details and other things that they did so that they wouldn't seem quite so bad. I've tried to be as fair and truthful as possible in my examples, but I can only see things from my own perspective. So it's obviously slanted in my favor. I can't see my actions from their perspective. I can only see them from my own, and if, like one of the cases, the fellow won't tell me anything that I'm doing to bother them, then, what am I going to think? Not much bad about myself, obviously, because they can't tell me that I'm doing anything wrong. And no, mentioning this is no sign of guilt whatsoever. Trying to suppress that would be an admission of guilt. It's simply human nature. We're all the center of our own attention. And how could it be any way else? It's something you should keep in mind when hearing anyone's stories, and that's why it's always so important to hear the sides of stories from both people involved. Because if you hear both sides of the stories, oftentimes you can at least somewhat piece together what actually happened. But keep in mind, neither story is going to be 100% accurate. It's just pretty much impossible for that to be true. And I can't even get a second story out of my friend here. If I raise up an issue I'm having with him, he either tries to change the subject or he just acts clueless. He never apologizes, discusses issues, or anything. So, if ever you find yourself wondering why others think differently of you than you think of yourself, or how you think they should think of you, you simply need to analyze their perception of you. Realize that they only know what you tell them, or how you act towards them. Completely ignore your intentions, thoughts, what life-changing events you've been through in your past, all that. They play no role in perception. And there's no way that they could unless they've known you long enough to know about life events and whatnot. Think only about how you treat them, only what you say, only how you act. When you analyze that, you'll be able to understand a lot better why they think of you the way they do. And when you begin to consider how you act towards people, and think about what you give them to perceive, you'll be able to build better relationships with others, and you'll be able to communicate much more effectively. I'd like to add that all of what I've talked about is intended only for you to use for your own introspection. You run into issues when you try to apply it to anyone else because you don't know what they perceive, and you never will. So you can't judge their perception. You can't judge their perception because you have no way of knowing their perception. Everything I've said in this discussion is just my opinion. Don't take it as facts. I also talk in absolutes in many areas just for the sake of not sounding unsure. Anywhere I use an absolute you think I should have spoken more generally, feel free to assume I said most of the time instead of always, or this is one reason why instead of this is why, or whatnot. I'm not a big fan of thinking there are absolutes in much of anything. Also, you're free to disagree, but I hope you'd at least consider what I say. Don't take what I say at face value, really critically analyze it, and please don't throw out the entire discussion due to one small detail you don't like. If you have any questions, you want to talk to me about what I've discussed, or you just want to tell me what you liked and didn't like about what was discussed, feel free to leave me a comment. If you have any ideas for whatever I should talk about in the future, let me know. I respond to most of the comments most of the time, and honestly, my favorite part of YouTube is reading comments. But thank you all very much for watching, and you have a good one.